Imagine you're exploring this massive, just terrifying Gothic cathedral.
Oh, sure.
You'd probably assume, naturally, that, one visionary architect drew up the blueprints. Like, it has this unified, horrifying design.
Right, that would be the logical assumption.
But then, as you look closer, you realize absolutely nothing matches. I mean, the foundation is made of these ancient, dusty tombs. The walls look like Persian fortresses. The gargoyles are straight out of Greek mythology.
Yeah.
And a stained glass. It was painted by Italian and English poets centuries later.
It's basically an architectural Frankenstein's monster,
Right.
A building where everyone just kept adding their own wing over thousands of years, completely forgetting what the original structure even was.
Yeah, and that exact phenomenon is how humanity built the modern concept of hell.
It really is.
So welcome to another deep dive. We are diving into the genealogy of Gehenna today, which is this fascinating exploration of how ancient graves, Persian bridges, translation errors, and Renaissance poets just accidentally constructed the ultimate terrifying cathedral of the afterlife.
We've got a massive stack of sources today, too.
Oh, huge.
We're looking at historical texts, biblical lexicons, and some really deep literary critiques to guide us through this.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand this whole thing, you need to understand what I call the meat grinder concept.
Which is really the foundational linguistic error that caused all of this massive confusion in the first place.
Yeah, explain that, because it's wild.
Well, if you look at the original texts of a Bible, the Hebrew of the Old Testament and the Greek of the New Testament, there are 4 entirely distinct ancient words used to describe various concepts of the afterlife, or, the underworld.
4 different words.
Right. You have Sheol, Hades, Tartarus, and Gehenna.
Right. But when early English translators, like the scholars who put together the King James Version, got their hands on these texts, they didn't preserve those 4 distinct concepts at all.
No, not even a little bit.
They essentially just dumped all of them into an Anglo-Saxon meat grinder, turned the crank, and flattened them out into one single English word.
Hell.
Just hell.
It's the ultimate linguistic oversimplification. I mean, by translating 4 different words with completely distinct cultural, geographical, and historical backgrounds into one catch-all term, we just lost the nuanced map of the ancient afterlife.
Right.
It's like taking the words prison, waiting room, garbage dump, and cemetery, and just translating all of them as the bad place.
That is a perfect analogy. So to figure out how we ended up with the modern pop culture image of this, fiery abyss, we have to isolate these ingredients and see when they were added to the cathedral.
We have to start by laying the foundation.
Right. And honestly, the foundation is surprisingly dull.
Extremely dull.
We're going back to around 1200 BCE to a concept the ancient Israelites called Sheol, which is mentioned, like 65 times in the Old Testament?
Yeah, about 65 times.
And the best analogy I can think of for Sheol is that it's like a universal waiting room where the lights have been permanently turned off.
That is highly accurate. In the earliest Hebrew texts, Sheol isn't a torture chamber. It is essentially the grave.
It's just a hole in the ground.
Exactly, it's the pit. When ancient writers describe it, they talk about a place of dust, worms, silence, and just forgetfulness.
And the most important part, the thing that really trips up modern readers, is that Sheol was completely morally neutral.
Yes, everyone went there.
Right. You could be a brutal dictator or a saintly peasant, and when you died, you went to the boring old grave. You sleep in the dust.
No demons with pitchforks.
Just stillness.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to ask why early Israelite society viewed death this way.
Yeah, why were they so okay with that?
The answer really lies in their social structure. Early Israelite culture was deeply communal, not individualistic.
Okay.
Their entire concept of justice was earthly, and it was tribal.
So they weren't sitting around worrying about where their individual soul was going to spend eternity.
Exactly. For them, God's justice happened here, on earth, to the community as a whole.
Like in real time.
Right. If the nation followed the covenant, they were rewarded with good agricultural harvests, peace, and prosperity.
And if they messed up?
If they broke the covenant, the punishment was famine, plague, or military exile. The ultimate goal for a person was simply to live a long, full life and be, as they said, gathered to your people in the communal family tomb.
So Sheol was just the great equalizer at the end of a physical life.
Exactly.
But a communal neutral grave doesn't really solve the problem of injustice, does it?
No, it leaves a huge gap.
Because if a cruel, corrupt king and a kind, oppressed peasant both just turn to dust and silence, then the universe is fundamentally unfair.
Right.
So to get a system of cosmic justice, like a fiery courtroom, we have to look at what happens when a society completely loses its earthly autonomy. Which brings us to a massive geopolitical shift around 500 BCE.
The Babylonian exile.
Right.
The Jewish people were conquered, forced out of their homeland, and eventually found themselves living under the rule of the Persian Empire.
And this is a crucial moment.
It is, because the Persians practiced a major religion called Zoroastrianism.
Okay, I've heard of Zoroastrianism, but how exactly did it change the blueprints of our metaphorical cathedral?
Well, Zoroastrianism introduced a stark cosmic dualism. They viewed the universe as an active, literal battlefield between the supreme God of truth and light, Ahura Mazda, and the spirit of lies and darkness, Angra Mainyu.
Meaning they suddenly saw the universe as a split screen, like a literal war between good and evil, rather than just a place where things happen.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And because of this epic battle, Zoroastrianism required a final resolution. They developed a highly detailed mechanism of judgment for the individual soul after death.
Okay.
Upon dying, every soul had to cross what they call the Chinvat Bridge, or the Bridge of the Requiter.
And looking at our sources, this bridge is guarded by two four-eyed dogs.
Yes.
Which is just the kind of vivid mythological detail I love.
It is incredibly vivid.
Yeah.
And the mechanics of the bridge are fascinating because it actually reacts to the moral weight of the soul crossing it.
Wait, how does it react?
For the righteous, the bridge widens out.
Yeah.
It becomes a broad, safe path that leads them to a paradise they called the House of Song.
Oh, that's nice.
But for the wicked, the bridge dynamically narrows until it's as thin as a razor's edge.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they lose their balance and plummet into the abyss below, the House of Lies, which is a place of darkness, stench, and punishment. They even had a concept of a final judgment involving a purifying river of molten metal.
Which, according to the text we're looking at, would feel like warm milk to the good, but would burn the wicked.
Right.
Now, impartially speaking, our sources note that historians aren't saying Jewish scholars just copy-pasted Persian theology.
No, it's not a direct copy-paste.
But this contact with the Persian Empire clearly acts as a massive catalyst.
It provided a desperately needed vocabulary. Think about the Jewish people at this time. They're an oppressed, conquered nation.
Yeah.
Earthly justice, those good harvests and peaceful borders had completely failed them.
Mm-hmm.
Wicked empires were winning.
Right, the bad guys were in charge.
Exactly. So they began to adopt this dualistic framework to express a profound hope. The hope that even if justice is utterly denied in this life, there is a cosmic scale, and God will balance it in the next.
So the foundation of our cathedral is shifting. We're moving to the period between 200 BCE and 100 CE.
Yes.
And this Persian influence sparks an absolute literary revolution. To understand this, we have to talk about a specific genre of ancient writing called apocalyptic literature.
Right.
Now, to a modern listener, apocalyptic usually means, zombies, meteors, and the end of the world. But that's not what it meant to them, is it?
Not at all. In the ancient world, apocalypse simply meant an unveiling or a revelation. It was essentially a genre of symbolic resistance literature. Oppressed people used highly coded, surreal imagery, beasts, angels, cosmic realms, to critique the empires ruling over them and to envision God's ultimate victory.
And the blockbuster hit of this genre was a text from around 200 BCE called the Book of Enoch, or 1 Enoch.
Yes.
This is the text that literally splits the grave.
Precisely. 1 Enoch takes that dark, uniform waiting room of Sheol and compartmentalizes it.
It adds rooms.
Yeah. The author imagines 4 distinct hollow places, or holding cells inside a mountain. One is a brightly lit space with a spring of water for the righteous.
Nice.
But the others are deep, dark valleys meant for sinners and significantly for fallen angels, the Watchers, who are held there in torment until a final day of cosmic judgment.
So Sheol has been renovated. We have compartments now. But around the same time, the Greeks are taking over, right?
Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great has swept through, and Greek culture is seeping into absolutely everything. And this is where we get what I like to call the Hellenistic smugglers.
I love that term.
Because how do the Greek gargoyles end up on our Jewish cathedral?
It comes down to translation. When Jewish scholars in Alexandria translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek, a landmark translation known as the Septuagint, they needed a Greek word for Sheol.
Right, they have to pick something.
They couldn't just invent a word, so they chose the closest Greek equivalent, which was Hades.
But you can't just borrow a word without borrowing its cultural baggage.
No, you really can't.
To a Greek reader, Hades isn't just a neutral grave. It's the underworld of Greek mythology, complete with rivers of fire, the ferryman Charon, and specific zones of punishment.
Exactly.
And our sources note that the New Testament even uses the word Tartarus, which is the deep abyss where the Greeks believed the Titans were imprisoned. Like in 2 Peter 2.4, it says God cast fallen angels into Tartarus.
Right.
Does this mean the biblical writers literally believed in Greek mythology? Like, were they worried about Cronus breaking out?
No, they weren't endorsing pagan theology at all. What's happening here is the use of cultural shorthand.
Okay, explain that.
Think about how we communicate today. You might say someone has an Achilles heel.
Sure.
You don't literally believe that a Greek goddess dipped her baby in the river Styx, rendering him invincible everywhere except his heel.
Right, obviously not.
You're just efficiently communicating that a person has a fatal vulnerability.
Oh, that makes total sense. So they're smuggling in the Greek vocabulary because it's the most effective way to communicate with an audience that's just steeped in Hellenistic culture.
Exactly. They use Tartarus to describe a temporary holding cell for rebellious spirits, stripping away the literal myth, but keeping the conceptual impact.
Okay, so we've got the compartmentalized grave of Sheol. We've bolted on the holding cells of Hades and Tartarus.
Yes.
But here's where it gets really interesting. If you ask you or me or just anyone on the street to describe hell today, the very first thing we say is fire.
Always fire.
Where did the literal fire come from?
It came from a physical place on a map, a place called Gehenna.
Gehenna, which is the fourth word in our meat grinder. And looking at the historical records, this is where one of the most persistent modern myths completely falls apart.
It really does.
If you grew up going to church or if you've read standard biblical commentaries, you have probably heard the famous garbage dump theory.
Yes, the idea that Gehenna, which is the Greek transliteration of the Hebrew Hinnom, or the Valley of Hinnom, a ravine just south of Jerusalem, was the city's municipal trash dump.
Right. The story goes that it was this perpetually burning pile of refuse, dead animals, and trash, just crawling with maggots.
Yep.
And the teaching is that Jesus simply pointed to this smoldering, stinking landfill outside the city walls as a handy visual metaphor for hell.
And what's fascinating here is that story is a complete historical illusion.
Wait, really? A complete illusion?
Completely. Biblical scholars and archaeologists have combed through the ancient records and literally dug through the dirt of the Valley of Hinnom. There is zero evidence, none whatsoever, of a perpetual municipal trash fire in antiquity.
That is wild.
The garbage dump theory didn't even exist in the ancient world.
Which blew my mind when we were reading the sources. Where did it even come from if it wasn't real?
It was invented entirely by a medieval Jewish commentator named Rabbi David Kimmey around the year 1200 CE.
Wait, 1200 CE? That's over 1,000 years later.
Yes. He was reading these ancient texts centuries later, trying to figure out why this specific random valley outside Jerusalem was associated with fire and judgment.
So he just guessed.
He made a logical guess. He thought, well, it must have been a burning trash dump. And subsequent commentators simply repeated his guess as historical fact for the next 800 years.
Wow. But the actual documented truth of Gehenna is so much darker and honestly so much more traumatizing than a garbage dump.
It really is. The real reason Gehenna became the ultimate metaphor for fiery destruction goes back to the Old Testament history of the kings of Judah. Specifically, apostate kings like Ahaz and Manasseh.
Right.
They didn't burn trash in the Valley of Hinnom. They burned their own children.
Which is just horrifying. They practice human child sacrifice to the pagan gods Moloch and Baal right there in the valley.
Yes, it was a horrific national trauma, a historical crime scene of the highest order. Because of these atrocities, the prophet Jeremiah famously cursed the valley.
Right.
He declared that it would no longer be called the Valley of Hinnom, but the Valley of Slaughter. He prophesied that God's judgment on the corrupt nation would be so severe that the dead would be piled up in that very valley, unburied, just left for the worms and the fires of military destruction.
I want you, the listener, just think about the darkest, most tragic location in your own country's history. Like a place associated with immense loss and national grief.
Yeah.
That is the kind of weight the word Gehenna carried for a first-century listener. When Jesus and his contemporaries used the word Gehenna, they weren't pointing to a stinky trash fire.
No, not at all.
They were invoking the deepest, most visceral metaphor possible for a place of ultimate divine judgment and national destruction.
Which brings up a very important biblical tension that we see in the New Testament texts themselves.
Okay, what kind of tension?
Well, when Gehenna is talked about in the first century, is it a place of eternal conscious torment, or is it a place of total annihilation.
Ah, because our sources highlight this exact debate.
Yes.
On one hand, you have texts quoting the prophet Isaiah, talking about a place where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. That definitely paints a picture of ongoing torment.
It does.
But then, in Matthew 10:28, there's a warning to fear God, who can destroy both soul and body in Gehenna.
Notice the word there. Destroy.
Yeah.
Not torture forever, annihilate. To cease to exist entirely. This tension exists right there in the text. To a first century audience, Gehenna was highly symbolic, apocalyptic poetry.
Right.
It was a terrifying warning about the consequences of rebellion against God, often tied closely to the impending military destruction of Jerusalem itself by the Romans in 70 CE.
So how does this nuanced, deeply localized Jewish poetic warning, this geographical metaphor, harden into an actual literal realm of eternal underground torture?
It's a major shift.
Like, how do the stone walls of our cathedral get mortared into place?
That shift really solidifies in the 4th century. You have the Roman Empire adopting Christianity, and monumental translation efforts begin.
Okay.
The most significant is the Vulgate, which is a translation of the Bible into Latin by St. Jerome. That became the absolute monopoly of Western biblical thought for over 1,000 years.
So the meat grinder really kicks into high gear here. But how exactly does a translation strip away a metaphor?
Think about it like this. Imagine someone today says a politician met their Waterloo.
Okay, yeah.
We all know that means they suffered a final, decisive defeat, referencing a specific battle in history.
Right.
But imagine a translator 1,000 years from now translates that literally into another language as they visited a Belgian water meadow.
The future reader would completely lose the concept of defeat. They'd think it was a literal story about a trip to a swamp.
Exactly. That is the mechanism of what happened to Gehenna. As the church expanded far beyond its Jewish roots, the localized cultural context of Sheol, the mythological shorthand of Hades, the prophetic historical trauma of Gehenna, it all just started to blur together.
It all got flattened.
Yeah, translating them into Latin blanket terms like infernus stripped away the local geography. What began as scattered, vivid, apocalyptic poetry was stripped of its metaphorical context and hardened into dogma.
Wow.
Hell was no longer a metaphor for destruction. It was codified as a literal, physical place on the cosmic map.
Okay, so by the Middle Ages, the church has established that hell is a literal place of eternal punishment. But it's kind of, well, it's vague.
Very vague.
It needed an architect to actually design the abyss. Enter the poets.
And no poet was more influential in mapping this out than Dante Alighieri.
Right, 1320 CE. Dante publishes the Inferno. And this changes everything. He takes this vague theological concept and engineers it into a meticulously structured, terrifying physical space.
Yes, the 9 descending circles of organized, ironic punishment.
But what is crucial to understand about Dante's architecture is the role of Satan. There is a massive misconception today that Satan is the ruler of hell.
Oh, huge misconception.
People think he's down there with a pitchfork, laughing, in charge of the torture.
But in Dante's Inferno, that is not true at all.
Not even close.
Dante's Satan is the ultimate prisoner. He's at the very bottom, in the 9th circle, frozen helplessly from the chest, down in a lake of ice at the center of the universe.
He's not ruling anything.
No. He has 3 faces, he's weeping constantly, and he's just mindlessly chewing on the 3 greatest traitors of history, Judas, Brutus, and Cassius.
It's so visceral.
He is pathetic. He is impotent. Dante's Satan has no power whatsoever. He is entirely trapped by his own rebellion.
Right.
The ice is actually created by the flapping of his own bat-like wings as he tries in vain to escape. It's a brilliant theological statement, really. Sin isn't a liberating rebellion. It's a dead end. It is ultimately paralyzing.
I just love this imagery. Dante's Satan is like a pathetic, frozen bug trapped in a cosmic web.
Yeah.
He's not in charge of anything. But, and this is the big, but that is not the Satan we see in movies or pop culture today.
No, it's not.
The Satan we picture today is suave, he's in charge, he's building an empire. Where did that guy come from? Who put in those stained glass windows of our cathedral?
For that, we have to move forward over 300 years to 1667 CE and the English poet John Milton.
Ah, Paradise Lost.
Yes. Milton invents what we might call the sovereign devil. Milton's Satan is a dynamic, charismatic, highly articulate rebel.
He's got personality.
Lots of it. He rallies his fallen angels. He actively explores the abyss. He famously declares that it is Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven.
Right. If Dante's Satan is a frozen bug, Milton's Satan is like the charismatic, manipulative CEO of a rival startup.
Exactly.
He's actively building a counter-kingdom.
And this raises an important question about how we form our cultural beliefs. Because it is Milton's poetic invention, this idea of an active, reigning devil ruling over a fiery kingdom that has completely hijacked the modern imagination.
It really has.
When most people today envision hell, they are not picturing the quiet, dusty Sheol of the Old Testament. They aren't picturing the historical, earthly tragedy of Gehenna.
No.
They are picturing the epic, mythological fan fiction of John Milton.
So what does this all mean? Let's zoom out and look at this massive, terrifying cathedral we've explored today. The evolutionary timeline is just staggering.
It really is.
We started 3,000 years ago with the boring, neutral foundation of Sheol. Then, influenced by the dualism of the Persian Empire, Jewish apocalyptic writers compartmentalized that grave.
Then the Hellenistic translators smuggled in the Greek gargoyles of Hades and Tartarus.
Meanwhile, the horrific historical reality of child sacrifice in the valley of Hinnom provided the visceral, fiery furnace of Gehenna.
Right.
All of these distinct ideas were shoved into the translation meat grinder of the 4th century, using the mortar of the Latin Vulgate to harden poetry into literal dogma.
And finally,
we handed the blueprints over to the poets. Dante engineered the 9 circles, and Milton installed the stained glass image of a charismatic sovereign Satan.
Which brings us to why you, the listener, should actually care about this journey. This isn't just a collection of ancient trivia or, translation quirks.
No, it's way deeper than that.
It stands as a profound historical record. The genealogy of Gehenna is really the genealogy of human anxiety.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
It tracks how humanity has wrestled across millennia with the ultimate questions of justice, morality, and just the deafening silence of the grave. Yeah. Every single culture added a layer to this concept because every culture was desperate to believe that our actions matter, that cosmic justice must exist, especially when earthly justice completely fails.
It's humanity projecting its greatest hopes for justice and its deepest fears of punishment onto the blank canvas of the afterlife. Which leaves us with one final thought for you to ponder. If the architecture of hell evolved this drastically over 3,000 years to match humanity's shifting understanding of justice, what will the next version look like?
That's the real question.
Right. As modern society radically redefines consciousness, morality, and existence in the digital age, how might our descendants reimagine the ultimate consequences of human behavior? If this bizarre, terrifying cathedral was built to answer the anxieties of the past, what kind of blueprints are we accidentally drawing up right now?
A fascinating question to leave them with.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.